Okay.
What is that? Is that the audio?
I'm sure.
Mhm.
Wait, just 1 minute. Yes, I'm watching.
The Jewish people respond to death with the words of heartbroken acceptance. In English, they mean, praised is the judge of truth, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Praised is the judge of truth who chose this time and this way for us to say goodbye to Joe Bettman. Adonai Natan, Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. Adonai has given, and now Adonai has taken. Praise be the name of our God. Yesterday was the winter solstice, the darkest and longest night of the year. It has been a long and dark and cold, difficult week for the Bettman family as they face the loss of their beloved husband, brother, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and uncle, Joseph Bettman. We are gathered to give comfort to his bride of 67 years, Elaine Bettman, and his sister, Elaine Pakros, and his children, Melissa and Tim Sweeney, Randy and David Fuchsman. I'm going to do that wrong. Fushman, thank you. Mark and Patty Bettman, Jay and Mary Bettman, Todd and Jean Bettman, Michael and Michelle Strapko, and Pam Strapko Ashwal. We also are supporting his 12 grandchildren, count them, Dan and Janice Sweeney, Brian and Stacy Sweeney, Lauren Sweeney here with Kyle, Alex, Jessica and Jack Bushman, Jacob Bettman and Amanda and Nick Young, Jonah and Isa Bettman, Kelsey Bettman, Michael and Jeremy Bettman, and of course, those sweet and wonderful great-grandchildren, Leighton and Parker and Lily, Warren and Jasper, and even baby Sophie. If it sounds like a biblical genealogy, it is. The Talmud, a compendium of Jewish law and lore, teaches when the first man, Adam, saw that the days were becoming shorter during his first winter outside the Garden of Eden, he thought, woe is me, the world is coming to an end. And so he struck two rocks together to make light and warmth and prayed to God. And we are told that when he reached the winter solstice and saw that the days were progressively lengthening, he said, this is the order of the world. And he observed a festival for the next week and observed it in this season every year thereafter. We too know the dark and cold reality of having lost the light of our lives. So, like the first man, Adam, we strike the cold, hard rock of reality of his death with the second rock to make light and warmth and to celebrate his life. With our words and our hugs, we bring light and life, for we know that he would want us to do that in the coming days and years ahead. Ever a realist, Joe would have told us, this is the way of the world. And so do we turn to the Jewish prayers and psalms and readings and wisdom of our people to commemorate the life of an amazing, wonderful man whose life brought us life and light and warmth and song and blessing. So do we remember Joseph Bettman. At all funeral services, we recite the 23rd chapter of the book of Psalms. It is known by heart by countless millions of people. It's recited when they find themselves in a situation of pain and trauma. Psalm 23 is a small psalm. It contains merely 6 sentences, 57 Hebrew words. However, it has become a cherished gem of so many people and has helped lift us out of the abyss. And so we begin with the Hebrew version of Psalm 23.
Adonai Rahawi Lo Hatzon Nin Oteshet Yabitzeni Amen Maluchot Amen Maluchot Yina Ashi, you shall obey, you shall obey. Yanteni bima kiletsede. Yanteni bima letsede. Ahanti halet bahagat samale lahira kiata ikmati shiftika umi ishanta Adonai, Rawi, Adonai, Rawi,
And for those who know it, please join me in the translation of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We are told that David is the sweet singer of Israel, but we of course know it's really Joe Bettman. And we are told these were the last words of David in 2 Samuel 23, the saying of the King David, the son of Jesse, and the saying of a man raised high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet singer of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord spoke to me, and his word was upon my tongue. The God of Israel said, the Rock of Israel spoke to me, ruler over men shall be the righteous, even he that ruleth in the fear of God. And as a light in the morning, when the sun riseth, a morning without clouds, when through clear shining after rain, the tender grass springeth from the earth. For is not my house established with God? for an everlasting covenant he hath made with me, ordered in all things and sure, for all my salvation and all my desire, will God not make it grow? David, we are told, Chai v'kayam, will live beyond death, and his memory will be forever established. Joe never tired of reminding us that he was born just around the same time as Anne Frank. Anne died at the young age of 16, and Joe at the advanced age of 92. But look how Joseph Bettman brought Anne Frank's words and sentiments into the world by the way he lived. He brought Anne's words and her voice alive through his own words and deeds. She wrote, "Look how a single candle can both defy and define the darkness." She wrote, "Human greatness does not lie in wealth or power, but in character and goodness." She wrote, "You can always give something, even if it is only kindness." Where there's hope, there's life. It fills us with fresh courage and makes us strong again. She wrote, and he lived, "Give, and you will receive much more than you ever thought possible. Give and give again. People will give, who give are never poor." You can always give something, even if it's a simple act of kindness. If everyone were to give in this way and didn't scrimp on kindly words, there would be much more love and justice in this world. Whoever is happy will make others happy. And finally, she wrote, and he lived, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply cannot build my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the suffering of millions. And yet, if I look up to the heavens, I think that it will all come out all right, that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again." And finally, to our littles, our small. We have the camp here, by the way, and I said I believe that Joe would love it if kids came running and tearing through this service. But Debbie Gliori writes, "Small said, 'But what about when you're dead and gone? Would you love me then? Does love go on?' And Large held Small snug as they looked out at the night, at the moon in the dark and the stars shining bright. 'Small, look at the stars, how they shine and glow. Yet some of those stars died a long time ago. Still they shine in the evening skies. Love, like starlight, never dies.'" The Talmud writes, "It is a good sign for one who passes away on the eve of Shabbat." And Joe Bettman, who knew how to do things right, did just that. But not only that, Yosef Shimon ben Yaakov Pasha, Joseph Bettman, died on Shabbat Vayechi, the Sabbath on which the Jews worldwide read the final chapters of the book of Genesis. Here we learn that Yosef ben Yaakov, Vayechi, that he lived. How fitting that the announcement of Joseph's death is entitled, "And he lived." The last parashah readings of Genesis describe how Jacob, the great biblical patriarch, is reunited with his beloved son Joseph in Egypt. And Jacob breathed his last, and he extracted a promise from Joseph and his brothers, "Take me out of this foreign land and bury me in the Holy Land alongside Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah." So upon Jacob's death, Joseph and his brothers hastened to return his remains to their father and of their father to the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron, and they laid him to rest. Joseph, meanwhile, Genesis tells us, went on to live another 110 years. He saw the third generation of his children's children. He chose to be buried among them, but nonetheless, he predicted to his brothers, God will visit your descendants and bring them up out of the land to the land God swore to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and at that time you will carry my bones from here. Legend has it that Joseph's bones lay in a coffin for more than 400 years of Egyptian slavery until the night of the Exodus, when in their frantic dash to freedom, the descendants of Jacob still took the precious time to search and find the coffin of Joseph. Joseph's bones were carried throughout their wanderings in an ark, next to the ark that carried the Ten Commandments, the words that teach us how to live in one ark, and the promise of continuity in the other. At long last, Atzamot Yosef, the bones of Joseph, were laid to rest with his kin. Today, we also considered Atzamot Yosef, the remains of our latter-day Joseph ben Yaakov, Joseph Bettman, Dayton's patriarch, statesman, macher, philanthropist, a sweet singer of Israel and Ohio, a mensch, doc, and most importantly, beloved husband and dad and grandpa and Zadie and Papa Joe. We will soon hear reminiscences of Joe Bettman's numerous accomplishments and accolades, his service to our country in the Army, his life of healing as a pharmacist, his volunteer and donor accomplishments, his leadership in the Jewish and greater Dayton communities, his love of Yiddishkeit and Israel and Jewish music, Joe and Elaine's work to resettle new Soviet refugees, the founding of the House of Bread, his efforts in foster care and Artemis and Children's Hospital and NCCJ, and so many more. Joe's numerous honors and awards and leadership accomplishments. But all of those pale in comparison to his life as a spouse and loving partner to Elaine for 67 years. I was lucky enough to get to see Joe in the hospital last week. I shared with him a wonderful gem I had just read. Turns out that the words of Isaiah 54:10, for the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love for you shall not depart from you. These words were actually the inspiration of another Yaakov Gershwin, George Gershwin as we know him, his famous lyrics. And so grasping Elaine's hand, he used his waning breath and crooned quietly to her, the Rockies may tumble, Gibraltar may crumble, they're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay. Joe's final breaths were spent in a love song to Elaine and his family. And this love extended to the entire family, just as the biblical Joseph saw his children's children onto the third generation, so was Joe blessed to see Leighton and Parker and Lily and Warren and Jasper, and he even got to meet baby Sophie. This week, you all surrounded him in person and virtually to receive his final words of blessing and sweet songs of life before he breathed his last. And so as we prepare to lay Atzamot Yosef, Joseph Bettman's bones to rest, he will be gathered unto his kin. And we pray that he has been greeted by his father Yaakov and his mother Pasha. And we also know that everything he was and everything he stood for will be carried in the ark of our hearts, even beyond his burial. Did you know that in Hebrew, the word etzem is both the word for bone and for essence? While Joe Bettman's bones will be laid to rest, his true essence is larger than life. His huge personality, his love of his fellow man and woman, his heart of gold, his generosity of spirit, his deep and resonant song, his love of Yiddishkeit, and his greatness as a husband and patriarch. That's his etzem, his very essence, and that will be with us as long as we live. While Joe Bettman's atzamot bones will now return to the earth. His etzem, his essence, will never die, as long as we carry him in our hearts and deeds. And then, indeed, will his memory be a blessing, vayechi, and he will always live. We continue now with some special memories that will be shared for us. We begin with Larry Burek, who will be reading for us words that come from Peter Wells, who is with us virtually online. Take my mask off. Please, yes.
Good morning. I am really honored to have this opportunity to channel the words of our good friend, Peter Wells. Peter could not be with us, as Razbai indicated, so he asked me to read these remarks that he prepared. And as Rabbi said, he's listening on the Zoom link, so I better not mess up. Almost 50 years ago, when Peter first came to Dayton to work with the Jewish Federation, Peter became immediate friends with Joe just within minutes. And they had been friends for many hours and years and decades since. Peter writes, "Today, as we mourn, we celebrate the life of Joe Bettman. For so many, Joe was our friend, our mentor, our partner, and our all-around mensch. Joe was a family man extraordinaire. His devotion to Elaine and everyone in their huge, exceptional family was unbelievable. He was always so proud of each and every one of his children, his foster children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, that many of them are now walking in his shoes as community volunteers and as professionals is an essential part of his legacy. Joe was the caring, humble, passionate Mr. Rogers for all neighborhoods. He connected with his neighbors surrounding his drugstores. He connected with the Jewish community locally, statewide, nationally, and in Israel. He connected with all segments of the Dayton community, north, south, east, and west. Joe respected everyone, regardless of differences. He was a lifelong learner. He was so empathetic. He was always concerned about the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the refugee, and the list is endless. Joe always stood strong, tall, and erect. Joe always stood up tall for so many people. Joe was a passionate, hands-on doer. He was Exhibit A for Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, or in his case, as Mr. Rogers' double, he was Exhibit A for repairing all of his neighborhoods. He did not just talk the talk, he always walked the walk, giving generously of his time, his money, and his talent. Joe was an extraordinary leader. Together with Elaine, wife and teammate, Joe did so much for all of his neighborhoods. His hands-on involvement with the resettlement of Soviet Jews here in Dayton is at the top of the list. Joe, with Elaine at his side, did it all. They arranged for the newcomers housing, furnishings, food, clothing, education, job training, and more. They raised the funds to make the arrivals happen. They celebrated with them. They counseled with them. They met with them at the airport. They cried and they laughed with them. Joe was indeed a soup to nuts doer for the Soviet Jewry Project and for so much more. Joe was a comforter, Talking and just being with him always made us feel better. I vividly remember, this is Peter talking, I vividly remember standing by his side in 1983 when we prayed together at the Warsaw Synagogue with his beautiful, booming bass voice, singing, practically shaking the rafters. I vividly remember our emotional walk together through Auschwitz as I searched for documents referring to my Aunt Greta and Opa Sandor, with Joe comforting me every step of the way. Joe believed strongly in tzedakah, in justice. Tzedakah defined him. He was so proud that he was able to financially support so many causes. He was proud of his founding and ongoing involvement with and support of the House of Bread. He preferred using his checkbook to support his many causes rather than driving an expensive car. You typically saw him driving used cars or eating at expensive restaurants. Ponderosa was often his eating venue. We need many more people like Joe, particularly these days. Joan and I will miss our many conversations with him. Rest in peace, my friend. And also, allow me to add, I know we would all like Joe to come out on this bima this very moment and speak to us in his bellowing bass, Geschrei, Amen. So instead, as we all pick up where Joe left off, join me in saying, Amen.
Good morning. My name is Mike Pratt. I am currently a retired United Methodist pastor living in Westerville. I've known Joe and Elaine for over 40 years. And during my first professional career, almost 30 years in the juvenile justice system here locally, Joe and Elaine were part of our Building Bridges program in the George Foster Home, a halfway house located on Salem Avenue, not far from Miracle Lane, where the pharmacy was. In fact, Elaine was one of our trustees. Joe was excited to learn of my transition into the ministry, and I'll never forget how helpful he was, and Peter Wells, in my first trip to Israel, in setting me up to stay in some kibbutzes in Haifa and Akka in the Upper Galilee. When I went out to Lewisburg as a pastor, every one of my confirmation classes, and I think there were 10 of them, there wasn't one time that part of what I did with them was to take them on a Friday night shul service at Temple Israel with Joe Bettman sitting right next to me, interpreting the services, and joining us for a meal afterwards where he would regale us in stories of his Jewish heritage and share with us the vast areas of commonality between our two faith traditions. Always, as we're talking, singing with that rich, deep voice. I told him he should have been a cantor. And I didn't realize until I talked to Elaine recently that early in his life, he had once thought of being a rabbi. I had Joe, of course, come out to my church on occasion, and he would speak and he would sing. And when I went to Columbus to serve, there was an occasion where I needed a large sofa, and went to the Bettmans and was able to experience that in our worship service. We shared so many Passover meals together in their home with their family. I don't think I've ever known a couple that when I was with them smiled like Joe and Elaine, just radiant, and you know how they could light up a room. And Joe was forever toasting when we were together, L'chaim, L'chaim. So let me close with a prayer, if you would join with me. Eternal God, you have shared with us the life of dear Joe Bettman. Before he was ours, now again he is yours. For all that Joe has given us to make us what we are, for that of him which lives and grows in each of us, and for his life that in your love will never end, we give you thanks. As now we offer Joe back into your arms, comfort us in our loneliness, strengthen us in our weakness, and give us the courage to face the future unafraid. Draw those of us who remain in this life closer to one another. Make us faithful to serve one another, and give us to know that peace and joy which only comes from you. We pray in your majestic, holy name. Amen.
Good morning. First of all, I don't think it's fair that I had to follow all the professional speakers, but here I am. For those who don't know me, I'm Dan Sweeney, Joe's grandson and son of Melissa and Tim. Joe, Mr. B, Dr. B, Dad, Grandpa, Papa Joe, Zadie. However you knew him, it was clear you knew a special man. You don't get the great city of Dayton to honor you with your own day without playing a significant and positive role in the community. He was a mensch, a tzaddik, doing what is correct and just. More than anything, he was a family man. His love was so strong for his wife, his sister and her family, 5 children, 2 foster children, 12 grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren, and all of those crazy enough to voluntarily join the family. There was never a time he didn't light up when family was around, even down to his final days. Unfortunately, due to COVID, his great-grandkids were not able to visit the hospital. My 3 called on Thursday while my mom was with him. He was at the point he could no longer respond verbally, but my mom cried as she explained. Their voices brought a big smile to his face. And that call brings me so much comfort. I never expected how difficult it would be to write about what I wanted to say today. As you've heard, there are almost too many things I could touch on because his life is so full of amazing accomplishments and successes, big and small. As an outpouring of support came rolling in over the last 4 days, it was clear how much he meant to this community, how he made real differences in people's lives. You can read many of his major achievements in his obituary and other articles, but as I alluded to before, his impact was seen all around, big and small. There's one story that our family comes back to because it was such a grandpa thing to do, even in an era where the rest of us would never even consider it. About 15 years ago or so, he was driving home in the pouring rain. Not in the worst part of town, but not the best. He saw a man walking on the side of the road and stopped to give him a ride. On the most basic of levels, that is who Joe Bettman was. Someone who loved to help others just for the sake of helping. He worked incredibly hard to provide for his family, working 12-plus hour days, 7 days a week for many years. Well, the hours didn't continue at this rate, and he may have established a daily afternoon nap. He was still there until he sold the pharmacy at the age of 83. Now, unless you were one of the kids or grandkids working at the pharmacy, it may surprise you that he was not always the jovial, cheerful man you may have known. Business was business, and he got into his own when he was at that pharmacy. As a teenager, my vocabulary was, let's say, further developed, working alongside him. He demanded excellent customer service. If the phone rang more than a couple times without being answered, the booming voice of God would come down, occasionally using words not found in the Torah. It was his passion for his customers that drove him, many of whom had been like family over many decades of service. I loved getting to see him in that element, taking time to schmooze with customers, or keeping open tabs on scrap pieces of paper for people unable to pay for their prescriptions. When the pharmacy closed, I imagine he forgave any outstanding debts without thinking twice. That was Joe Bettman. Perhaps his biggest influence on many of us was his involvement in the Jewish community. I can absolutely and unequivocally say that he and my grandma are 100% responsible for my strong ties to Judaism. Their dedication to Judaism, philanthropy, and volunteerism are difficult to measure. I'm proud of all they have done, but my favorite memory was going to the gate at the airport, yes, all the way to the gate, to welcome the Jewish Soviet refugees brought to Dayton as part of the Federation's Operation Exodus beginning in 1990. He chaired that campaign that raised $2 million and brought 200 Jews to Dayton. Watching these families arrive in their new country, their new home, to fully furnished apartments and stocked refrigerators was incredible. That willingness to lend a hand was Joe Bettman. My siblings and I were very lucky to call him Grandpa, and he taught us so much about values and doing the right thing. My brother Brian remembers, everyone who knew Grandpa knew he believed in Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Whenever we talked, he would instill Tikkun Olam in a way that was relatable to me by referencing one of his favorite shows, Blue Bloods. Grandpa loved the moral dilemmas the characters faced, and we would discuss them together. I've incorporated these discussions into the way I police, and I will continue to do so for the rest of my life. I will miss his words of wisdom very much. Beyond all the accomplishments, I'm going to miss just Grandpa. As a part of my birthright as oldest grandchild, I had unique access to Grandpa that others did not have. While I almost feel bad about that, it is these memories and these moments that I will always remember. Whether attending Bengals games or the ATP tennis tournament, I would gladly endure those drives to Cincinnati again and again to spend time with him. I say endure because if there's one thing Grandpa could do, it was to have deep philosophical conversations to the background of classical music while trapped in a car. He also had no issue pulling onto the side of the highway. No, not a rest stop, the actual side of the highway, to briefly rest his eyes before continuing on. Safety first. But I would give anything to be able to have those conversations again. He also shared his love of tennis with me. As I now start to pass that same love of the game down to my kids, I know I would have never started without my grandparents. He and I would play at the courts in their neighborhood before or after family get-togethers. And even with everything he had going on, it was always about me. I even began to sub into his weekly seniors game when I would come home from college. I can remember him endlessly telling the story, again, even in the last several weeks, about me running him around the court when we would go out to play. He would tell me to just hit it up the middle as his legs weren't what they once were, but I would keep hitting to the corners and out wide. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I just wasn't good enough at the time to control my shots. He gave me too much credit, which I would happily take, but confess to you all now. All of the things that Grandpa did in the Jewish community and the general community, the pieces you can read about in his obituary are inspiring to all of us. It's impossible not to be in awe. I owe to him my desire and my drive as I work to keep the Jewish community a strong and vibrant place to live. Like many things in Judaism, it feels like an obligation in an effort to continue the legacy he created. But there's also nothing I would rather do. I'm so proud to be his grandson and will miss him deeply, but I am beyond thankful to have had 36 years to learn from and just be with him.
When my brother Todd assumed I was going to give the funny eulogy today, I explained to him that I didn't think that was going to be the case. Dad loved a good joke and delivered many good jokes. He also loved a great story. Dad had a wonderful sense of humor. Some of these jokes were even a little off color that now even his grandchildren are old enough to hear. Dad was a gentle man when he wasn't at the pharmacy. For example, when my brother Mark stole $20 from my mom's purse and recruited me as an accomplice at the tender age of 7, we went to the pet store and came home with a parakeet and hamster with cages, all for $20. And we practically had to beg my dad to spank us. Deserving or not, it was the only time I remember getting spanked. And of course, it hurt him much more than it hurt us. I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about today. I did know I wanted to speak at my father's service. Material presented itself this week, and when I sat down to write, the words just flowed. So here it goes. Thank you for coming. Joe Bettman was known for so many things. There's been many articles about his accomplishments written over the years, and surely this week. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about our dad. Dad was very generous with his family. I'm not talking about money, although it was clearly important for him to provide for his family's financial well-being. I'm talking about his time. He always had time for conversation, even if we knew in the onset that we would be disagreeing. He loved to ask questions and offer advice. He respected everyone's space and the right to live their own life. He just always wanted to be a part of it, and he was always welcome. I'm going to tell a story that happened just this week. When a family member was being comforted after Dad's passing, it was said, "It's okay, he's with Jesus." We had a great laugh over that. We smiled at its innocence. We also took the opportunity to explain to this person Dad's religion and the importance that Judaism played his whole life. But it got me thinking. Everyone grieves in different ways. We celebrate life and mourn death all at the same time frame. Some find comfort in Jewish teachings, some in Christian teachings, some simply find comfort in family. Whatever doctrine you find comfort at times like this, the loss of a loved one, that's where you lean for strength. Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 92. He deserved to go peaceful that way. The impact Dad had on the Jewish and the Christian communities over his lifetimes is immeasurable. My hope is that Dad is met at the pearly gates by all righteous souls that came before him. He deserves that as well.
Hi, I'm Mary, the middle daughter-in-law. And I just was, as I awakened, I was thinking about my father-in-law's life this morning. And I was thinking how amazing it was that he always put other people's life stories ahead of his own. And he never touted his own wonderfulness, but he always appreciated everyone else's situations and what they were going through and how they were growing as an individual. I also thought about the wonderful visits that we had from Joe and Elaine. They would randomly show up at we have a little deli in Cincinnati, and they would randomly show up with lifelong friends, Sally and Don Green, or they would meet Cousin Susie or David Foreman in the back, many, many wonderful friends. And of course, his precious little sister, our Auntie Lane. And we cherish those times and are so grateful that you did that over the last 5 or 6 years. As you've all heard, Papa Joe loved a good story. And so I'm going to share a memory with you now. Joe could tell that I had a fond appreciation for Yiddish. And although it wasn't my background, I enjoyed the words and their laser-like exactness to situations. They could encapsulate an entire situation into one word. And he saw that I appreciated Yiddish. And so over the last probably 36 years, whenever we had a discussion, he would share a word or a phrase, and it was marvelous, and we love that. So rewind about 5 or 6 years ago, I was watching a nationally syndicated fashion show, What Not to Wear, and the girl, the co-host on that, said, "Ooh, that girl's skirt is so short you could see her pupuk." And I said, "Oh my God." So I immediately got on the phone and called my Yiddish mentor, Papa Joe. I said, "Papa, this word was said. I don't know what it means. Forgive me, go easy on me, because I don't know what it is. But they used the word pupuk." And he said, "In what context did they use it?" And I said, "As in, her skirt was so short that you could see her pupuk." And he laughed and informed me that that means belly button, and it's Yiddish sarcasm. Whew, I was so relieved. So if my Papa Joe was with me today, I would turn to him and say, "Papa, how would one say, 'We will miss you' in Yiddish?"
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Jack Fushman. I am the son of Randy and David Fushman. I'm also one of Joe Bettman's grandsons. And some would say I'm the one that looks the most like him. If you haven't seen the picture, go on my Facebook, you can check it out. At Jack Fushman. Anyways, as Dan and many others detailed in their speeches today, my grandparents played a vital part in Operation Exodus and helped settle over 200 Soviet Jews in our community of Dayton. Many of these individuals became customers at Bettman's Pharmacy and stayed customers until 2012, when Grandpa closed the doors and retired at age 83. What people might not know is when he retired, he sold a store to Walgreens in Trotwood, Ohio. Part of the deal was that any of the employees from Bettman's would automatically get a job as long as they passed all the other parts of the test at Walgreens if they wanted. And as my grandpa would say, "You bet your ass I took that job." Sorry, Parker, Lily, and Sophie. And I became the newest cashier at Walgreens at age 17. One of my first couple months at Walgreens, there was a customer who came in who is giving trouble to our Walgreens pharmacy workers. People told me he came from Bettman's Pharmacy, but I was never there when he came in, so I didn't know who he was. During one of my shifts, this customer, an older Russian man, came in. If you didn't know this man, I could see why you might be cautious due to his angry appearance and broken English. After going to the pharmacy, he came back through the store and saw me and recognized me for Bettman's Pharmacy. Immediately, he went from a frown to a huge smile. He walked over, he held my hand, he gave me a big hug, and as some do in their culture, he gave me a big kiss on my cheek. Now, although I'm a very likable person, this exchange had nothing to do with me. This was all because of Joe Bettman. When people see anyone who's a relative of the Bettmans, they automatically see my grandpa through this. He touched so many lives, and it is up to my cousins and I to continue his legacy. And I didn't write this in the speech, but as people were talking about how his family is living up his legacy, we really are. We have Federation employees, we have healthcare workers, we have police officers, we have customer service. Cousins, let's continue living up his legacy. Grandpa, I love you so much, and I'll miss you forever. I have the fortunate legacy of looking like your identical twin, and I will continue, and good looks, and continue doing good for my Jewish community and outside community like you did your whole life. I love you.
Here's the irony of the situation. I controlled the order of speakers, and I still let them take all my material. You are going to hear everything you just heard repeated, even my gigs, even this little quirk. I'm Todd Bettman, by the way. I'm the baby of the family. My brother Jay even stole this piece from me. The baby of the family, I'm still pulling out my readers because, and I printed in really large type. I also just want to follow up quickly before I forget. Jay was talking about the fact that Dad always put, everything was on notes. Jay, Dan, I forget. Everything was on notes, whether it was customer debts, whether it was appointments, whatever it was, and he had a wad of papers, not cash, never had cash, but he had a wad of papers always in his pocket on the Bettman's notepad. He and my mother were in a convenience store, Lawson's, 40 years ago, at the corner of Catalpa and Hillcrest, and they were a part of a armed robbery. And with these guys in the store with guns in their faces, give me everything in your pockets. And they were just they may have been coming from Temple or somewhere where Mom was dressed up. Mom had some pretty nice jewelry on at the time. They weren't paying attention to jewelry. They wanted to know what was in his pockets. My father, with a gun in his face, asked the following: "Can I keep my papers, please?" The answer was no. They found that they did find those papers, I think, later in the dumpster behind, and that was really all he was concerned about. The cash was fine. The papers were his problem. Like I said, you're going to have heard some of this before, and maybe that's because it was the most important things about my dad. And I found that if I start to ad-lib and take things out, Gene will tell you, I tend to get very jumbled and use a lot of cuss words. So I'm going to read straight down and try to save everyone's earlobes. Although that would be in Dad's honor also. It'd be like at the pharmacy. Last Thursday evening, I sat with my mother and other family members at my father's hospital bedside. As I sat next to him, I reached for his hand with mine, and our hands locked into a tight, strong embrace for several beautiful long minutes. Even as the rest of his body and person appeared so weak, the grip he held me with was certain and loving. After a period of time and knowing it was getting late, I stood from my chair, looked deep into his eyes, told him in no uncertain terms how much I loved him, and kissed him goodnight on his forehead. Last Friday evening, the very next night, I sat in the exact same spot, weeping at his bedside as he lay lifeless before me. I finally rose from my chair, gazed lovingly at his face, and kissed him goodbye for the very last time on his now cold forehead. There's a theory that heaven is like a 3-class luxury jet, and I apologize, this analogy is a little bit aged. So I had to take away 3-class luxury jet to replace luxury 747. You can spend eternity in coach class, or you can spend it in business class, but the goal, the ultimate way to spend the hereafter, is to spend it in first class. Here you have a seat that reclines to a completely flat position, a big screen monitor, high-speed internet, a privacy door, and gourmet meals. This is why I like to call, and as I used to always remind my parents, this is why I like to call quality of life, or in this case, I suppose, quality of the afterlife. According to this theory, however, you cannot buy your way into first class, nor can you use frequent flyer miles. The only way to earn an upgrade to this exclusive section is to live your life as a mensch. Leo Rostin, the Yiddish maven and author of The Joys of Yiddish, defines a mensch as someone to admire and emulate and someone of noble character. The key to being a real mensch, according to Rostin, is nothing less than character, rectitude, dignity, a sense of what is right, responsibility, decorum. Growing up, my father was not always the coolest dad in the neighborhood. He didn't necessarily have the coolest clothes or the coolest cars. He wasn't a great athlete or a great musician. Even his singing voice, for which he has received great praise and which I've come to love, was not exactly the coolest thing going, especially as he sang at my bar mitzvah while I was trying to impress all the cool guys and cute girls. But my father always had something intangible that earned my respect. He had character, rectitude, dignity, a sense of what was right, responsibility, decorum. I guess I didn't realize at the time, but my father was indeed just such a mensch as Leo Rustin described. This overwhelming decency and sense of purpose even led my father to explore becoming a rabbi at one point, as mentioned in someone's previous speech, case number 1, which ultimately, of course, was decided against. Instead, he continued to express his love for Judaism through his singing, of course, and also through volunteerism, leadership, and activism. Alongside my mother, they became a well-respected, vital, and integral voice in the community. In fact, the two became the first pair in the entire country to ever win Community Young Leadership Awards in the same year. That year was 1968, and I was but a year old, which necessarily begs the question of who was watching me at the time, and may just explain some of my own peculiar quirks. The plaques for those awards hung on the wall of our family home on Harvard Boulevard as I was growing up. It made such a huge impression on me, and so there was no prouder day in my life than when I myself was the recipient of that very same award, which my sister Randy had also won, and later my nephew Dan. After all, it was their inspiration that allowed it to happen, that enabled it to happen. Between the two of them, they've chaired just about every major board, committee, campaign, task force, event, benefit, and mission in this Jewish community at a pace, competence, and energy level very few of us could even fathom. And I suppose this is as good a time as any to point out the essential and fundamental role my mother has always played in his activism. Like yin and yang, they do not exist without each other. Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor, is a hymn from the book of Proverbs, which extols the virtue of and expresses gratitude to a wife. I know this hymn describes perfectly my father's feelings towards my mother, and we have discussed it, he and I, in the past, and what an amazing team they made. Our Jewish community, and dare I say the state of Israel and Judaism itself, are all better for it. But serving the Jewish community was not enough for my parents. An exemplary demonstration of the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, or repair of the world, organizations throughout the area have benefited from my parents' involvement. My father was a co-founder with Sister Dorothy Kammerer and served as the first board president of the House of Bread, which, as Sister Dorothy liked to say, is anything but a soup kitchen, but rather, as my father described it, a place where those in need could not only get a hot meal, but also an ear to talk to, food for the stomach and for the soul, and always served with dignity. The name itself was actually suggested by my father upon his return from one of many trips to Israel, as House of Bread is a direct translation of the Hebrew Beit Lechem, which itself is the root of the name of the little town of Bethlehem, the traditional birthplace of Jesus. Even more appropriate this week, perhaps, appropriately melding two great religious traditions to serve the entire community. My parents' financial support of Sister Dorothy's next venture, The Other Place, now Homeful, was also integral to its founding. Their involvement with and chairing of the boards of Building Bridges and the George Foster Home, Artemis Center, and involvement with and financial support of Children's Hospital, Care House, NCCJ, UNCF, and so many others have likewise contributed to each of those organizations' successes. Their lifelong commitment to and involvement with the cause of social justice, from the civil rights movement in the 60s to the desegregation of schools in the 70s, to advocacy throughout their lives, has been unceasing. With their business always located in the inner city, their service to and advocacy for those neighborhoods, and especially communities of color, were a particular point of pride, and those communities embraced them as well. Several years ago, in recognition of my dad's professional and personal contributions to the most needy in society, and especially in the West Dayton community, in 2016, Reach Out Clinic of Dayton dedicated the Bettman Charitable Pharmacy at the clinic in his honor. The mission of Bettman Charitable is to provide pharmaceutical assistance to the uninsured and underinsured population of Montgomery County. Again, what an astounding legacy. I have to tell you, over the past couple of weeks since Dad went to the hospital, I've been handling his affairs, sorting his mail and such. The volume of letters and solicitations requesting his annual year-end donations literally sits 1.5 feet tall, and he donates and has donated to every single one of them, quietly and without expectation of fanfare or recognition. We've all come to be fairly cynical these days, and the great majority of us are trained to simply overlook the beggar on the street corner or on the highway off-ramp. And for that matter, most of the requests for donations we all receive in the mail every day, we also ignore. Not my father. His heart simply wouldn't allow it. To the joy of many a beggar and homeless person over the years, but especially the myriad of charities he sent checks to over the years. There's a story in our family from many years ago about a young man who showed up on our lawn, disheveled and disoriented. And no, it was not one of my brothers coming home from a party in high school. Also probably happened once or twice. Many would have called the police on the young man and been done with the situation. Not my father. Never one to particularly take his own safety into account, as my brother recounted, in the face of human suffering, or his family's for that matter. He invited this young man into our home, fed him, and made all the necessary calls to get him proper psychiatric help. Joe Bettman was never one to leave anyone out in the cold. And Diane knew that would have been enough. But a wonderful affirmation that sometimes good things happen to good people, business success also found its way to my father. Over the course of 56 years, Bettman's Pharmacy became an institution in the community, and my father a trusted pharmacist to so many, including the third and fourth generations of many families. To this day, not unlike Jack, I get stopped out and about by people. By the way, Jack, I'm the original lookalike. You're just a clone. To this day, I get stopped out and about by people who hear my name or who look at me or hear my voice and are reminded of my father, who just want to share how kind Doc Bettman has been to them or to a family member, or how Mr. B helped them when no one else could or would. And this business, which to my mother's consternation, he remained active in until just 9 years ago, at the age of 83, indeed provided very well for my parents and for our family. But for my father, the financial success of his business provided the means for so much more than just comfort for his family. What gave my father more joy over the years than just about any other pursuit was in giving back. In time and energy, as we've all already noted, but also of his means. My father was never much for flashy cars. Our driveway when we were young was often described as the Bettman used car lot. Is that a member of my family? Sorry. Thank you. Our driveway when we were young was often described as the Bettman used car lot, although he did at last finally begin to buy new rather than used cars sometime in the 90s. When I was a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, I was really impressed by the new Mercedes that the father of a soccer teammate drove to a game. Boy, they must be rich, I opined to my father one day. Toddy, he answered. Yes, he always called me Toddy, still did until very recently. Toddy, I could drive a Mercedes if I wanted to. But the kind of car I drive has never been important to me. Giving to my community and the less fortunate is what has always been important to me. That is what makes me feel rich. In 1889, the great industrialist and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie asserted in his book, The Gospel of Wealth, that all personal wealth beyond that required to supply the needs of one's family should be regarded as a trust fund to be administered for the benefit of the community. No one will ever confuse my father's bank account with Andrew Carnegie's, nor will we ever have a great deli or concert hall in Manhattan named after him. But the philosophy stands: take care of your family, but also take care of your community. And that is how my father has lived his life. Does one have to be a billionaire to be a philanthropist? Not in my father's case. He just had to care and occasionally write a little check also. Some have asked what my father did in his retirement, even though it didn't happen until he was 83. Well, he volunteered, of course, taking his talents to Children's Hospital, where he became beloved as Grandpa Joe, pushing the library cart around from hospital room to hospital room, reading to the sick children, offering love and support to their parents. A story was just recounted to me this week from a family friend, a story that I was unaware of, and that beyond reading and giving of his love and cheerfulness so readily to all, he also was well known to quietly pay for meals in the cafeteria for families that had no money or were otherwise unable to afford something to eat. He never told anyone about this, of course, even his family. I myself just learned of it this week, as I said, from a family friend, and she was told by several nurses who work in the facility. And no memorial for my father would be complete without mentioning his love of singing. As a young man, He joined the choir at his synagogue, and through every chapter of his life, he continued singing. His venue encompassing bass was heard on the bimas of all of Dayton's synagogues, at Covenant House, where he led Kol Nidre service for over 30 years, from its opening until just recently. In cantorial solos at community events with congregational choirs, most recently with the Dayton Jewish Chorale. He loved singing all kinds of music, though his unique deep bass of a singing voice didn't always lend itself to popular music. One of my dear friends whose bar mitzvah my father was the cantor for described it as like being bar mitzvahed standing next to God. That said, he loved singing Yiddish lullabies like Tumbala to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren as he rocked them to sleep. He loved singing popular songs of the day like the Mills Brothers' Up the Lazy River with his childhood best friends Sammy Skuro and Avi Becker. He loved participating in community musicals and festivals and never said no to the opportunity to share his voice. And then there was Old Man River from the musical Showboat, the song I most associate with him. I was listening to it on the way over here this morning, actually. That got me a good cry already. And now as I near the end, this is interesting. This is just a side story, and it's okay because Rabbi already covered it. I got home last night from my sister's, we were all together, and I wasn't satisfied with my eulogy, and I ripped it up. And I pulled together pieces from a few things that I've written for my father over the years. I've had 4 or 5 now occasions that I've been able to present him with awards and things from the community. And in doing so, I realized that I missed the entire start of this speech, and I'm going to get to the finish. But Rabbi already covered it, and that is, the dad always liked to remind us that he and Anne Frank were born within 2 days of each other in 1929. Anne Frank on June 12th, and Dad on June 14th in 1929. And I always say in my speeches, I'm going to tell you a story of 2 children, the first of which was born on June 12th. I'll get to her later, the second which is with my father. So I've told you my father part, right? So now as I near the end, I'm going to tell the punchline without the story. I told you at the beginning of my remarks that there was another child born in that June of 29, only 2 days before my dad. That child's name was Anne Frank, whose diary we have all read, murdered by the Nazis in 1945 at the age of 15. And so today, as we mourn my father's passing, we remember the millions who perished during the Holocaust, a cause so important to him, but we also celebrate 92 years of accomplishment and contribution and relevance and importance, even more well appreciated, perhaps by a single twist of fate or the enduring grace of God, by the 77 years in between her death and his that might never have been. Many words have been used to describe Joe Bettman. Kind, caring, compassionate, generous, gentle soul, giant, legend, icon. But none better describes him than the Yiddish word already mentioned previously, mensch, meaning a person of integrity and honor, and the Hebrew word tzaddik, meaning righteous one. He truly represented the very best aspects of both words. On behalf No, I can't read it. On behalf of my sisters Melissa and Randy, my brothers Mark and Jay, our spouses, children, my Auntie Lane, watching remotely with us. My brother Mark is also watching remotely. This age of COVID is a hell of a thing. But especially my mother, our mother. We thank you all for being here to celebrate and to mourn my father. These past several years have really been a struggle for my dad on those tired legs and feet of his, through numerous health issues, large and small. And yet, even as he was always the one, it's been a rough few years, health-wise. And yet, all through it, he was the one always taking care of us, always, till the end. It's taken me a lot of tears and introspection these past few days to get to this point. But I am at peace with his passing because I know he finally is at peace as well. Dad, as you said to Randy in the hospital the other night, through labored breath and speech, I love you. You'll never know how much. I wish I could put it on a billboard this big. Dad, today we all see that message painted across the sky with our love and admiration for you. Your memory will be a blessing, your soul never forgotten. Rest in eternal peace. Amen.
My name is Jeremy Bettman. I'm the youngest grandchild. A few days ago, I started putting together an arrangement of Old Man River. I hope he would have liked it. Old Man River, must know something, but he don't say nothing. That Old Man River just keeps rolling along. He don't plant taters, he don't plant cotton, and them there plants, they are soon forgotten. But Old Man River just keeps on rolling along. You and me, sweat and strain, bodies all aching and we're racked with pain. Tote that barge and lift that bell, get a little drunk and land in jail. But I get weary, sick of trying, tired of living, but I'm scared of dying. No Man River just keeps rolling along. Thank you.
As I stood on this beam many times before, representing the Federation and handing out the tzedakah boxes to all the bar and bat mitzvahs, now that my kids are making the circuit, I'm called on to that quite often now. Again, that is in reference to the Bettmans, so it's more fitting, very fitting that I'm here now to announce another scholarship fund in reference to the Bettmans of their Joe being a mensch and their tradition in honor of tzedakah and helping others. It is my honor as both the president of the Jewish Federation of Greater Dayton and lifelong friend of Todd, the entire Bettman family, to announce a new community award named in honor of Joe. The Hebrew word tzaddik means righteous person, and just about every measure Joe Bettman was such that person. And so 2021 will be the inaugural year for awarding the Joe Bettman Memorial Tzaddik Award. This award will honor a member of the Jewish community for their philanthropic efforts and dedication, not only within the Jewish community, but in Dayton and the broader community at large. In addition to a beautiful personalized tzedakah box for their home, the recipient will also receive a cash grant to be directed to a charity or charities of their choice. Joe was passionate about tzedakah, tikkun olam, ma'asim tovim, into helping as many people as he could. And this award is a reflection of that passion. The Jewish Federation is honored to work with Joe, the Bettman family, to celebrate such an immeasurable legacy, and is grateful for their financial support. Thank you.
And we turn now to our concluding prayers, appropriately enough, the El Malei Rachamim prayer, which prays that Joe's soul rests in peace, is often accompanied by the giving of tzedakah, of charity, in memory of our beloved. The words of the prayer say, El Malei Rachamim shochein bamromim, hamsei menucha nechona al kanfei hashechina. Compassionate source of all that is, who is present in the heavens, take our loved one under your holy and glorious wings that shine like the sky. B'ma'alot kidoshim u'tichorim kezohar harakia mazhirim. Yosef ben Yaakov v'Pasha shahalach la'olamo b'gan Eden tehi menuchato. In the name of the soul of our loved one, please, compassionate one, provide rest for the soul of this beloved in Gan Eden. Ana ba'al harachamim yastirehu b'seter kenafecha la'olamim utzror bitzror hechayim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'namar Amen. Compassionate one, may he rest in peace and never withdraw your protective wings. Bundle his soul into the bond of life. God is his everlasting inheritance and peaceful resting place, as together we say, Amen. And no one can chant El Malei Rachamim as did Joe, and so we hear him indeed with these words.
Tachas kanfei hashechino lenishmas shehalach le'olamo ba'arachamim yitzror achayim es nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach v'shalom amishkavo v'nemar Amen.
Well, he is no longer physically with us. His voice and everything he stood for is with us for all time. His soul, we pray, will rest in peace as we say, Amen. And we move now to the Jewish tradition of the recitation of the Kaddish prayer. It is said that this prayer is the spiritual hand clasp between the generations, connecting two lifetimes. It's an epilogue to Joe's life. It will be said by all of his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren for all time. We rise together to give thanks for the gift of life that we have shared for so long and so well. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shamei rabbah, v'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala uv'izman kariv imru, amen. Yehei shamei rabbo mevarach leolam ulalmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpoar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha birichu la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'ama v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shamaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the maker of peace bring peace to us, to our world, to our nation, to the people of Israel, but mostly to this family in need of comfort and peace. And we say, Amen. And we are seated. Following our service of commemoration, the family will move into our back lobby and Levin Hall to greet you and spend a few socially distanced moments with these many, many guests. Our service of committal will take place at David Cemetery in the Temple Beth Orr section at 1:30 p.m. with military honors. All are welcome to join us at David Cemetery at 1:30. The Bettman family will then be sitting Shiva at the CJCE tonight and tomorrow night from 6:30 to 8:30, and the Shiva Minyan will begin at 7 p.m. on both nights. And we ask, of course, for everyone to please plan to observe all COVID-related protocols. And so, Joe, we send you on with love in our hearts, crying tears of joy for the life you lived, praising the source of life for connecting our lives. We send you on to the next life. We send you on the way you lived, embracing who you were, not the space you leave, praising the source of life for allowing us to love. We send you on to the next life. We send you on without fear. We will not curse or rend our garments, praising the source of life for granting us time. We send you on to the next life. We send you on with praise, singing songs of joy for all creation, praising the source of life for making us flesh and blood. We send you on to the next life. We send you on with libations and toasts, drinking to health, drinking to memory, praising the source of life for giving us words to share. We send you on to the next life. We send you on with stones, not flowers. We will not add death to death, praising the source of life for all creation. We send you on to the next life in peace and in love and in song. Amen. Our service in the sanctuary is complete now. Please spend some moments hugging and sharing your moments with each other. You ready? So look.